Our next speaker is going to be Paul Fleischman. So he's the author of more than 30 books for children and young adults. And he's known, amongst other things, for his historical novels, novels for young adults dealing with modern-day themes. Crown is using one of his latest books called Eyes Wide Open for our core class to explore the basic principles that that allow us to interpret the media in today's society. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Maybe I'll launch slide. Well, yes, Eyes Wide Open, about the environment. Not my usual thing. I write poems, plays, novels, short stories. But I grew up in the 60s, and I remembered being in high school. Vietnam was the story of the decade. People were graduating from my school, going off to fight. But the war wasn't in the classroom, wasn't in textbooks, wasn't in school, was invisible. And all these years later, I realized the environment was the same thing. An even bigger story. Story not just of the decade, the century, the millennium. And I decided to try to do something about it. That was a big change. When you're writing fiction, you're pursuing the art of invention, shaping, aesthetics. This required the art of explanation, a totally different thing. And I'll share with you today some lessons I learned along the way and after the book came out. The first thing was, what angle are you going to take? The models that occurred to me first, like Hiroshima by John Hersey, Anne Frank, where you take a big event and you reduce it. You focus on one character. And that's very powerful, very dramatic. People can relate to that person. But the environment really wouldn't fit into that. It's too broad. It's too wide. And so I decided to go from the microscope to the telescope. And I actually drew on the memories of my best teachers in high school and in college. And I realized they were people who didn't just give us isolated facts. They gave us the context, the principles, the bigger things that explain those facts. And once you knew the names for those principles, wow, then you started seeing them in the world. And it was like when I took botany at Berkeley my first semester. Suddenly, the world of plants just jumped out. I had no idea it had been there all those years. There they were, mosses. Yeah. Same thing with other principles. Names are powerful too, You find out that that's a barn swallow over your field. You learn that name, you'll always remember that. And you start noticing swallows that you'd never noticed before. So that was the angle I decided to take. Well, here's some things I learned along the way that maybe you can apply if you ever find yourself pursuing that art of explanation. First, know what your listeners, your audience, your readers already know and don't know. I, for instance, had assumed naively that Inconvenient Truth had worked its way through the schools, that by the time you got to high school, of course, kids had seen it 19 times. So I'd written most of the book. I went to a school, a really good charter school, talked to the kids, and actually asked for a show of hands. Who's seen the book? Who's seen Inconvenient Truth? No one. Not even the teacher had seen the movie. Okay, so that was a good wake-up call. I had to go back and really explain things so that people who had no background could understand it. I was aiming at really high school. And, that's a different problem than if you're writing for adults. With adults, you can assume a different level of knowledge. But, I've been in a classroom. This was a middle school in Santa Cruz a few months ago. And I mentioned something about Canada, and the teacher, off to the side, quick, opened up a geography book and held out like a map, to show where Canada was. Well, okay, I didn't know that. I kind of thought we all agreed on where Canada was, but not necessarily. So know who you're talking to and what they know. I was also, quite frankly, uninformed. But again, that's usually the way it is when you're writing. You become a student. You're an ad hoc scholar. There's a lot of things you need to find out, and you go and find them out. This was really true with the environment. One of the things I found out was it's such a breaking story. It's not just broad, it's breaking. It's a really tough nut to crack. It's changing under your feet. I spent several years writing the book, even though it's short. Short is harder, let me tell you. And so when I started the research, it was widely thought that natural gas was a safe bridge fuel to get us to the future, and all was going to be fine. And by the time I finished the book, that knowledge was out the window. So things change. That makes it hard. That makes it hard. I learned how crucial morale is. I'm going to read you a quote from another environmental book. You don't have to know what it is, who wrote it, but we've all read paragraphs like this. Forests are being cut down, wetlands drained, coral reefs grubbed up, agricultural lands eroded, salinized, desertified, or simply paved over. Pollution is now generalized. Our groundwater, streams, rivers, estuaries, seas, and oceans, the air we breathe, the food we eat, are all affected. If current trends persist, in no more than a few decades, it will cease to be capable of supporting complex forms of life. So that quote was in a really wonderful book by Stuart Brand called, what was that called? I can't remember. Pardon me? Whole Earth Discipline. Thank you. And here's his gloss on that quote. The author's worries are accurate individually, but they are selective, one-sided, and over-aggregated into a paralyzing spasm of angst. Well put. A little fear is a good thing. It can motivate a correction. You're dozing in your canoe. You hear falls ahead. You wake up and get over to the side. Too much fear, however, is paralyzing, as that paragraph indicates. So I realized you have to include action. You can't just list bad things. You have to show a way out. Otherwise, people feel no motive to act. Morale is also crucial for the author, for you, if you're working on something like this. This took several years, and boy, there were some real downtimes in that. And I found what really bucked me up interested was great art. I would go to concerts and hear fabulous musicians who have incredible talents, or see great visual artists, go to dance concerts. Was anybody else here at the incredible Nuts remixed by Tandy Beale? I mean, did that not fill you with joy and energy and inspiration? Yes. So we all need that in regular doses. Absolutely. There is the issue, which you might face, of how honest you should be. You'd probably only face that if you're writing not for adults. But, you know, it was hard. It was a debate in my head. Should I tell readers that, you know, the CO2 that's already up there is going to be up there for 1,000 years, maybe? That was really hard. I was running the risk of paralyzing them. And I did go back and forth on that. Eventually, I decided I had to tell them the truth, but here's the way I phrased it. Greenhouse gases already in the atmosphere will continue warming our climate for years. Bringing them down as low as we can, as fast as we can, is the best thing we can do for our future. So you have to walk that edge between being honest and not being paralyzing. And I think both of those statements are true. I found a way to satisfy both sides of my brain there. There was the danger of mental vested interests. A lot of the book is about money. Money is as important as molecules in the environment. And so I put a lot into commercial interests who were slowing down our response to the writing on the wall. But vested interests can be mental. For instance, I was very, very susceptible to the assumption of doom. Not hard to be there. There's a lot of evidence. But history doesn't actually only go downhill. Maybe some of you here have read Steve Palumbi's book, The Death and Life of Monterey Bay. Things went up. Things got better. They don't only get worse. I grew up in LA in the 50s and 60s. When I was a kid, you could not see Catalina. You know, about 3 days a year, the rain would come, wash out the air, and oh my God, there's an island there. Now it's just the opposite. Now you routinely see Catalina, and there's very few days where you don't see Catalina. We have really cleaned up the air. Hear, hear. Yeah. What about politics? It seems so dismal. Last election was 2014. San Benito County had an anti-fracking bill they wanted. They were outspent by the oil companies 14-1. They were totally outgunned. There were flyers and everything. It looked hopeless. They won. They won, they won, they won. History doesn't just go downhill. So that's something we all need to be reminded of. So did I save the world with this book, as I hoped? What was the response? Well, it came out in 2014, right about the time. Publication day was practically the day of the People's Climate March in New York City. I was there at the march, and if you were watching it on TV, as a friend of mine was, she told me that on Good Morning America, in the background, behind the announcers, you could see people streaming through the streets, walking toward the march, and there was not a single mention of it on TV. So, you know, we're up against some pretty high, some pretty well-funded, some pretty entrenched interests there. So there's that. There's the fact that most people really don't want to confront the environment. I went to Bookshop Santa Cruz when Mary Roach was there, wonderful nonfiction writer on science topics, for her book Gulp. And the audience was just roaring, laughing. So was I. It was hilarious. It was wonderful. It was interesting. But Gulp is like a really fun elective class. You go there to be entertained and learn a few things along the way. The environment is like a hard class you're supposed to take. You have to take. You don't want to. Not many people can look it straight in the eye. My wife is really, really tough. She wields what's called a striker saw, and she has no problem cutting through the skulls of big sea lions to get out the brains, to take out tissue. No problem. I could not get her to read Jared Diamond's Collapse or This Changes Everything by Naomi Klein. Just not going to go there. And most of the country feels the same way. Eyes Wide Open is much shorter. It's for people, and most of the country is not going to read Naomi Klein's book. You know, it's 495 pages or whatever it is. It's a major commitment. It's a beautiful piece of writing. Powerful, strong, well-researched. Not that many people are going to go there. So I went toward a primer, something short and sweet, 200 pages, tops. I learned that adults, after the book was published, I found out something shocking. Adults are in the dark no less than teenagers. Oh, yes. I would describe the book to, people, and I heard reactions from adults I couldn't believe, like, well, we have blue recycling barrels. Like, it's all covered, right? Problem solved. A very well-educated, well-traveled woman asked me in all seriousness if water was a fossil fuel. Now, this woman knows a lot, and she's been around the world. And what that told me was how far off stage the environment is for most people. It's just not there. It's way in the wings, out of the field of vision. There's a whole chapter in Eyes Wide Open called Out of Sight on that issue, why that is so. But it's true for adults too. It's just like sex ed. The environment is sex for adults. It's like they're afraid of it. It causes, sweaty palms. They don't want to be brought up around the dinner table or other places. I was actually disinvited from speaking at a school in Iowa, and I've won the Newbery Medal, okay? I'm sure that's the first time a Newbery medalist has been asked not to come and speak after I had been asked to come and speak. After an administrator suddenly opened the book and read it, said, you can't do that. So there's, we've got some obstacles here. And one of them is just the level of ignorance among all of us. When I do a talk in schools and I ask, where does the water in this room come from and the electricity, I now know exactly what's going to happen. Kids are going to stand up, wave their hands, and give me wild guesses. They have no idea, but they invent stuff. And in the back of the room, there will always be the teachers on their phones. They don't know either. They're trying to find out really, really fast. None of us tend to know. It's not out there for us. I mean, that's why we like this world we built so much. We don't have to worry about lugging water and growing food, right? All those things. So there's that issue. I learned, lastly, how important hope is. This is the beginning of a piece that Al Gore had in Rolling Stone about a year ago. The forward journey for human civilization will be difficult and dangerous, but it is now clear that we will ultimately prevail. The only question is how quickly we can accelerate and complete the transition to a low-carbon civilization. That's really clever. He's declared the war is over right at the beginning. And so we feel filled with energy and hope. Then he spends, 9/10 of the article telling us what the problems are and the challenges. But we've already been girded to attack them because we feel confident that we're going to win. Hope is inspiring. Martin Luther King didn't say, I had a really bad nightmare that I think we should avoid. He said, I have a dream, and he laid it out. I learned that not just hope, but wonder is really important. And if you haven't seen it, if you didn't see it when it was first on TV just a year and a half ago, something like that, check out the redo of the series Cosmos, the redo of the Carl Sagan one, this time with Neil deGrasse Tyson. It's incredible. It's incredible. As many people have pointed out before me, you need to love the world before you're going to bother to save it. And so that's crucial. And boy, there's a series that makes you love and be interested in the world. Another one came out at just the same time on TV. Fabulous also. Interesting title, Your Inner Fish. It's interesting because I was going to do a book just like that. It was going to be called Animal in the Mirror. And just about where our different, how evolution is present in our bodies. And this guy did it with fish and humans. Fascinating. So cultivating wonder is crucial, just like art is. And thank you for having me here today, and thank you to all the other wonderful presenters. Just one postscript. Santa Cruz Public Library is using Eyes Wide Open beginning in March in a program called Book to Action. It's a statewide program. Last year, some of you might recall, they did a book on incarceration. So people read the book, and then they try to pivot from education to action. There's some flyers in the back about some different events involved. There'll be a lot of things happening, and I invite you all. Thank you.